What if the story of Earth is not missing pages, but missing chapters? What if the silence between the ruins speaks louder than the monuments that remain? Somewhere beneath deserts, beneath oceans, beneath the weight of official timelines, there lingers a quiet unease. An intuition that something once existed which no longer fits within the tidy margins of recorded history. Stone stands where memory fails, and sometimes the precision of ancient structures feels less like primitive effort, and more like the echo of something refined, something forgotten. So before you allow your body to sink fully into this calm, before your breathing deepens and the edges of the room soften into shadow, take a quiet moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you truly resonate with what is unfolding here. And if you feel inclined, share your location and local time in the comments below. It is strangely comforting to know where in the world these thoughts are drifting tonight. There is a particular discomfort that arises when a civilization appears already sophisticated at the moment it first enters the archaeological record. Ancient Sumer does not begin as a slow experiment in mud and survival. By the time cuneiform tablets emerge from Uruk, writing is already complex, mathematics already abstract, astronomical observations already precise. The so-called Sumerian king list, preserved on clay and discovered in the early 20th century, speaks of reigns stretching tens of thousands of years before a great flood. Scholars interpret these figures symbolically, and perhaps they are. Yet symbolism itself suggests memory, distorted, mythologized, but not necessarily fabricated. The first cities rise in Mesopotamia around the 4th millennium BCE, and yet agriculture, monumental building, and social organization appear almost abruptly in several regions of the world. In southeastern Anatolia, Göbekli Tepe predates the Sumerians by thousands of years. Its massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, were arranged in precise circular enclosures around 9600 BCE, at a time when conventional theory holds that humanity was still largely nomadic. The site challenges the assumption that agriculture created civilization. Here, monumental construction may have preceded farming. If so, then the intellectual or spiritual impetus came first. But from where? The Younger Dryas period, ending roughly 11,700 years ago, marks a sudden climatic reversal at the close of the last ice age. Evidence from Greenland ice cores suggests abrupt temperature shifts within decades. Some researchers have proposed that a cosmic impact, a fragmented comet striking the ice sheets, triggered widespread fires and ecological collapse. The hypothesis remains debated, but its implications are unsettling. If advanced coastal settlements existed during that transitional era, rising sea levels and catastrophic flooding would have erased them almost entirely. More than 100 meters of ocean rise has submerged ancient shorelines across the globe. Marine archaeologists have documented submerged structures off the coast of India near Dwarka, in the Gulf of Kambat, and beneath the waters near Yonaguni in Japan. Interpretations vary. Some formations may be natural geological features, others show patterns that suggest deliberate shaping. Controversy surrounds them because certainty is elusive. Yet the oceans hold more than 70% of Earth's surface, and systematic exploration of continental shells remains limited. It is not unreasonable to imagine that entire chapters of human habitation now rest beneath sediment and salt. Then there is the matter of precision. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns to true north with astonishing accuracy, deviating by only a fraction of a degree. The polygonal masonry of Sacsayhuaman in Peru interlocks with such intricacy that even modern tools struggle to replicate the fit. Critics argue that ancient peoples possessed extraordinary skill and patience, and that is undoubtedly true. But skill implies accumulated knowledge. Knowledge implies transmission. Where are the transitional forms, the crude experiments leading towards such mastery? In many cases they are sparse or missing. Ancient texts across cultures speak of lost ages. Plato's account of Atlantis in the Timaeus and Critias describes a powerful civilization destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. Most historians regard it as allegory, a moral tale about hubris. Yet Plato situates the story within a chain of transmission, Egyptian priests recounting events to Solon. The Egyptians themselves kept records reaching back millennia before Plato's time. Were these records literal, metaphorical, or fragments of something older still? The Library of Alexandria once housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Its destruction, gradual, piecemeal, contested in its timeline, symbolizes more than physical loss. It represents the fragility of collective memory. Knowledge centralized becomes knowledge vulnerable. Later institutions, from imperial archives to ecclesiastical councils, determined which texts were preserved and which were declared apocryphal. The shaping of canon is not always malicious. Often it is pragmatic, yet every act of selection implies exclusion. How many treatises on astronomy, engineering, or cosmology were deemed unnecessary, heretical, or obsolete? Medieval chronicles mention strange devices. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a shipwreck in 1901, stunned modern engineers with its complexity. Dating to the 2nd century BCE, it modelled celestial cycles through intricate bronze gears. Nothing comparable survived in the historical record for over 1,000 years afterward. The device suggests a technological tradition now largely lost. Was it an anomaly, or the surviving fragment of a broader culture of mechanical sophistication? Even in the Renaissance, knowledge re-emerged as if rediscovered rather than invented. Manuscripts from antiquity resurfaced in monastic libraries. Greek and Roman texts returned to circulation, sparking scientific revival. It is tempting to imagine knowledge as linear progression from primitive to advanced. Yet history often resembles a pulse. Growth, collapse, preservation, forgetting, rediscovery. The pattern repeats. Geological time dwarfs recorded history. Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Writing, however, spans only about 5,000. The silence preceding script is vast. It is filled with stone tools, cave art, and scattered bones. Evidence of cognition, symbolism, and adaptation. But could there have been intervals of complexity that left minimal trace? Advanced does not necessarily mean industrial in the modern sense. A civilization attuned to astronomy, acoustics, and megalithic engineering might leave behind structures aligned to stars, yet leave no steel, no plastic, no obvious residue detectable after tens of thousands of years. Speculation must remain anchored to evidence, yet evidence itself is incomplete. Archaeology is shaped by what survives, and survival is biased. Organic materials decay, coastal settlements drown, earthquakes fracture cities into unrecognizable rubble. Volcanic ash entombs some sites while leaving others erased. The absence of proof is not proof of absence, it is simply absence. There is also the human tendency toward narrative stability. Institutions rely on coherent timelines. Educational systems require simplified arcs. To introduce the possibility of lost high knowledge complicates the story, it destabilizes progress. Yet complexity does not equal conspiracy. Sometimes loss is accidental, sometimes it's environmental, and sometimes it's the quiet consequence of power consolidating what is permitted to be remembered. The unease persists not because of definitive proof, but because of patterns, recurring myths of floods, gods descending with knowledge, golden ages preceding catastrophe. Comparative mythology reveals striking parallels between cultures separated by oceans. Independent development is plausible. Human imagination shares archetypes. Yet one cannot entirely dismiss the possibility that memory, distorted across millennia, survives within story. As this first layer settles, the question lingers gently at the edge of awareness. If fragments of advanced understanding once existed and were erased by climate, catastrophe, or curation, what remains hidden not in secret vaults, but beneath sediment and assumption? And if the earth itself is an archive, written in stone and submerged coastline, who decides which lines are read aloud, and which are left asleep beneath the tides? If coastlines were once farther out, if entire plains now lie beneath shifting currents, then the maps carried in classrooms are only the latest edition of a much older manuscript. The continental shelves, drowned at the end of the last ice age, stretch outward like ghostly extensions of today's lands. During glacial maxima, sea levels were dramatically lower. Vast territories, fertile, temperate and habitable, connected what are now islands and continents. Doggerland once linked Britain to mainland Europe. Sunderland unified much of Southeast Asia. Berinia formed a bridge between Siberia and North America. These were not marginal landscapes. They were ecological corridors rich in life. When the ice sheets melted, they did not do so politely. Meltwater pulses raised sea levels in rapid surges, perhaps several meters within generations. Ancient river valleys filled. Coastal settlements vanished. If early societies clustered near shorelines, as humans consistently have throughout history, then their material traces now rest beneath sediment, inaccessible without technology only recently developed. The archaeological record, therefore, is skewed inland by default. The absence of early coastal cities may reflect not their non-existence, but their submergence. Marine surveys have revealed submerged paleo shorelines and river channels off the coasts of Australia, India and the Mediterranean. Sonar imaging and sediment cores suggest human presence in regions now underwater. Off the coast of Gujarat in India, underwater structures near the Gulf of Khambat sparked debate in the early 2000s. Artifacts recovered from the seabed were dated by some researchers to over 9,000 years old. Critics questioned the stratigraphy and context, cautioning against premature conclusions, yet even skepticism acknowledges possibility. The ocean floor is not empty. It is layered, and much remains unexplored. Near Yonaguni in Japan, a massive rock formation with apparent terraces and right angles rises from the seabed. Some geologists interpret it as a natural sandstone formation, fractured along regular planes. Others note features resembling steps, platforms and alignments. The debate continues, not because evidence is definitive, but because it resists simple categorization. Nature can produce geometry. Humans can mimic natural contours. When erosion blurs intention, interpretation becomes an exercise in humility. The Mediterranean offers a quieter reminder. During the Messinian salinity crisis around 9 million years ago, the Mediterranean nearly dried out when the Atlantic connection closed. Later, the Zanclean flood refilled it, in what may have been one of the most dramatic geological events in Earth's history. While this predates humanity, it illustrates the volatility of basins. Enclosed seas can empty and refill. Landscapes can transform beyond recognition. Geological upheaval is not an anomaly, it is the rule. Returning to more recent epochs, evidence suggests that Neolithic communities possessed maritime capabilities earlier than once assumed. Obsidian from the island of Melos reached mainland Greece around 11,000 years ago, implying seafaring. Colonization of Australia required ocean crossings at least 50,000 years ago. Humans were not confined to land. They navigated water long before written history. If they travelled, they likely settled. And if they settled, some settlements now rest beneath waves. There is a subtle tension between academic caution and imaginative extrapolation. Responsible scholarship demands context, stratigraphy, and reproducibility. Yet imagination often leads inquiry forward. The idea that complex societies could have flourished along now. Submerged coastlines is not inherently fantastical. It is consistent with human behavioural patterns. The question is not whether people lived there. They almost certainly did. but whether their societies reached levels of organisation or knowledge beyond what surviving inland evidence suggests. Acoustic research in ancient sites introduces another layer. At certain megalithic structures, including chambers within the Great Pyramid, and temples in Malta such as the Hypogeum of Halsaflieni, resonance frequencies amplify human voice in unusual ways. Experiments have shown that specific tones can induce measurable physiological responses. While it would be unwarranted to assume ancient builders fully understood acoustic physics as defined today, it is equally simplistic to assume they were unaware of experiential effects. Architectural alignment to sound may have been intentional, rooted in empirical observation rather than formal theory. Stone circles across Europe align with solstices and equinoxes. Nabta Playa in southern Egypt contains megalithic arrangements dating to around 6000 BCE that appear to track celestial events. Astronomy did not suddenly emerge in Mesopotamia, it evolved across cultures. Precision observation requires continuity. Calendrical systems, agricultural planning, and ritual timing all depend on sustained knowledge transfer. If some of this knowledge originated earlier than surviving texts indicate, then the textual record captures only a fragment of its lineage. It is worth noticing how often rediscovery shapes technological narrative. The Roman recipe for a particular hydraulic concrete, capable of withstanding seawater for millennia, was only recently understood through material analysis. For centuries, the method was effectively lost. The Baghdad battery, discovered in Iraq and dated to the Parthian period, has been interpreted by some as an ancient galvanic cell. Many scholars propose alternative explanations, yet the object's function remains debated. Ambiguity is uncomfortable. It suggests incomplete understanding. Historical discontinuities do not require grand conspiracies. Knowledge can dissipate through war, migration, disease, or cultural shift. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed, infrastructure deteriorated, literacy contracted, roads decayed, skills once common became rare. The so-called Dark Ages were not devoid of achievement, but they illustrate how quickly complexity can thin. If such contraction occurred within the last 2 millennia, what of earlier epochs marked by climatic chaos? The end of the Younger Dryas brought abrupt warming, megafaunal extinctions, and hydrological upheaval. Oral traditions among indigenous cultures worldwide recount floods, fires from the sky, and lost homelands. While myth cannot serve as direct evidence, it preserves emotional memory of environmental trauma. Across continents, similar motifs emerge. Are these convergent storytelling instincts, or faint reflections of shared experiences during periods of global transition? Beneath this inquiry lies a quieter philosophical tension. Modern civilization equates advancement with industrial output, digital connectivity, and measurable consumption. Yet an advanced understanding of astronomy, geology, or acoustics does not necessitate factories. It requires observation, continuity, and symbolic language. A society might attain high conceptual sophistication without leaving behind alloys or plastics. If such a society fell to sea level rise or tectonic upheaval, its most durable legacy might be stone alignments and fragmented myths. The ocean continues to conceal. Autonomous underwater vehicles now map continental shelves with increasing resolution. Each survey reveals ancient riverbeds, submerged forests, and paleo lakes. These findings shift baseline assumptions incrementally, almost imperceptibly. There is no dramatic revelation, only accumulation. And yet, each new data point widens the frame of possibility. The idea of lost advanced technologies need not conjure images of machines beyond imagination. It may instead refer to integrated systems of knowledge, ways of reading the sky, shaping stone, harnessing resonance, and aligning architecture with cosmic cycles, systems that once flourished in places now unreachable. If fragments of such systems persist, embedded in monuments and myth, they do so quietly. And so the map expands again, not with certainty, but with questions. If the coasts were erased and the seabed remains largely unread, how much of human ingenuity sleeps beneath the tides? And if future generations were to inherit only our concrete foundations after millennia of erosion, would they misjudge our beginnings as incomplete, as we perhaps misjudge those who came before? If fragments of knowledge once rose and fell with the tides, then stone may be the only language that endures long enough to whisper across ages. Yet stone does not speak plainly. It erodes, fractures, sinks into soil. And still, across continents, certain structures remain, not merely as shelters or tombs, but as enigmas. Their scale unsettles. Their geometry lingers in the mind long after explanation has been offered. At Giza, the Great Pyramid continues to invite both admiration and restraint. Egyptology has long situated its construction during the 4th dynasty, under Pharaoh Khufu, around 2560 BCE. Quarry marks within relieving chambers bear the names of work crews associated with Khufu's reign. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials supports this timeline. The mainstream narrative holds firm, and yet, even within that framework, questions persist. The precision of alignment to cardinal directions, the internal chamber configuration, the sheer logistical coordination required. These are not mystical attributes, but they are extraordinary. It is not that ancient Egyptians lacked capability. On the contrary, their administrative systems, agricultural surplus, and skilled labour force made monumental building possible. But when granite blocks weighing up to 70 tons appear in the king's chamber, transported from Aswan hundreds of kilometres away, the mind pauses. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated plausible transport methods using sledges, lubrication, and river barges. The process is conceivable, and still, something about the scale resists emotional ease. Then there are the polygonal walls of Cusco and Sacsayhuaman in Peru, stones shaped with such precision that a blade cannot slip between joints. No mortar, no obvious tool marks consistent with simple chisels alone. Archaeologists attribute the technique to skilled Inca stonemasons using hammerstones and patient abrasion. Indeed, unfinished blocks at quarries reveal stages of shaping. Yet the aesthetic of interlocking geometry, resistant to seismic tremors, suggests a deep empirical understanding of structural resilience. The walls have withstood earthquakes that shattered later colonial constructions built atop them. In Lebanon, the Baalbek platform supports Roman temples with stones among the largest ever used in antiquity. The trilithon blocks, each estimated at over 800 tons, form part of the podium. Roman engineering prowess is well documented. Arches, aqueducts, roads spanning continents. Still, the transport and placement of such megaliths invite renewed scrutiny. Some scholars propose pre-Roman foundations later incorporated into imperial architecture. Evidence remains debated. The site's layered history complicates attribution. In the Pacific, the city of Nan Madol, built upon artificial islets off the coast of Pohnpei, consists of basalt columns stacked in lattice-like formations. Constructed between the 12th and 17th centuries CE, its scale and method astonished early European visitors. Oral traditions among the islanders speak of twin sorcerers who levitated stones through chant. Anthropologists interpret such stories as symbolic memory. Yet the basalt columns, some transported from distant quarries, remain tangible testimony to coordination and intent. Across Europe, long before Rome, Neolithic builders raised Stonehenge, aligning stones with solstitial sunrise and sunset. The blue stones were transported from Wales, over 200 kilometres away. The monument evolved over centuries, reflecting cultural continuity. It was not built in a single burst of genius, but through sustained vision. That continuity suggests institutions of knowledge transmission, ritual specialists, astronomer priests, Oral mathematicians, roles rarely preserved in skeletal remains. It is tempting to separate spirituality from science when interpreting ancient sites. Yet for early societies, cosmology, agriculture, and architecture intertwined seamlessly. Tracking celestial cycles ensured survival. Aligning temples to stars was not superstition but seasonal calibration. The distinction between sacred and technical may be a modern imposition. There are, however, anomalies that invite quiet speculation. The precision with which certain structures encode astronomical cycles sometimes exceeds immediate survival needs. The 365-day solar year, the 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle, precessional awareness hinted at in mythic symbolism. These layers imply long-term observation. Precession of the equinoxes unfolds over approximately 26,000 years. Direct awareness would require generational accumulation of data. Did ancient cultures track such slow shifts consciously, or were later interpretations retrofitted onto alignments after the fact? Archaeoastronomy treads carefully between pattern recognition and overinterpretation. Human cognition excels at detecting order, yet independent confirmation across sites strengthens plausibility. Nabta Playa's stone circle in southern Egypt, dating to around 6000 BCE, aligns with solstitial sunrise. The Goseck circle in Germany, older still, appears oriented to winter solstice events. These are not isolated curiosities. They represent a pattern of skywatching cultures. One might ask whether advanced technology must always imply machinery. What if advancement meant integration? Architecture harmonized with seismic behavior, stone resonance tuned to vocal frequencies, spatial geometry aligned with solar arcs. Modern engineering often isolates variables. Ancient systems may have synthesized them intuitively. This does not diminish their achievement. It reframes it. And yet, there remains an undercurrent of absence. Transitional phases between crude and refined are sometimes sparse. The leap from simple dolmens to intricately fitted cyclopean masonry seems abrupt in certain regions. Archaeological gaps may reflect limited excavation or preservation bias. Still, the gaps exist. They create space for questions. Skepticism is necessary. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Many sensational theories collapse under scrutiny, but careful questioning does not equate to gullibility. It acknowledges complexity. History is reconstructed from fragments, and fragments are partial by nature. Even the concept of primitive deserves reconsideration. Hunter-gatherer societies demonstrate ecological intelligence refined over millennia. Complexity does not always correlate with monumentality. Perhaps what unsettles modern observers is not that ancient builders achieved greatness, but that they did so without the industrial scaffolding we assume indispensable. If knowledge once flowed through networks now lost, oral traditions interrupted by catastrophe, specialist guilds dissolved by migration, coastal academies drowned beneath meltwater pulses, then surviving stone becomes both testament and riddle. It tells of capacity without revealing full curriculum. The mind circles back to continuity. Civilizations do not arise from emptiness. They inherit, adapt, transform. If some inheritances were erased by sea or sand, then later cultures may appear to emerge suddenly, when in fact they are inheritors of invisible legacies. As shadows lengthen across ancient masonry, and the night sky resumes its quiet rotation, one cannot help but wonder, are these structures endpoints of ingenuity, or survivors of something more continuous than we allow ourselves to imagine? And if their builders once held integrated systems of knowledge now fragmented, what remains embedded within the stones, waiting not for revelation, but for patient listening? If stone preserves geometry, then myth preserves memory, not in the literal sense of archival accuracy, but in the subtle way trauma and transformation embed themselves into story. Across continents, separated by oceans and millennia, there are echoes, floods that swallow worlds, teachers who descend from the sky bearing knowledge, ages of harmony preceding collapse. These are not uniform narratives, yet their recurrence unsettles the assumption that they are merely coincidence. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a great deluge sent to cleanse humanity, with Utnapishtim surviving by constructing a vessel at divine instruction. The Hebrew account of Noah carries similar structure. In India, the Satapatha Brahmana speaks of Manu warned by a fish of an impending flood. In Mesoamerican traditions, there are stories of previous worlds destroyed by water. Indigenous North American narratives describe inundations that reshaped the land. Scholars of comparative mythology caution against drawing simplistic lines between these tales. Human communities living near rivers experience floods. It is natural for flood myths to proliferate. Yet the scale described in some accounts transcends seasonal overflow. Geological evidence confirms that at the end of the last ice age, meltwater pulses dramatically altered coastlines. The Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, proposed by marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman in the 1990s, suggested a rapid flooding event around 5600 BCE when Mediterranean waters breached the Bosporus. Critics have debated the timing and magnitude, yet sediment cores do indicate significant shifts in the region. Even if localized, such events could imprint themselves into cultural memory, spreading through migration and retelling. There are also stories of civilizing figures, Oans emerging from the sea in Sumerian lore, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Viracocha in the Andes. These beings are described as bringing agriculture, astronomy and lore. Conventional interpretation views them as mythic personifications of cultural development. Yet their portrayal as returning after catastrophe hints at cycles. The motif of a golden age followed by decline appears in Hesiod's works and days, in Hindu Yuga cycles, in various esoteric traditions. Whether allegorical or ancestral memory, the pattern persists. It is possible that myth functions as a vessel for encoded environmental knowledge. Rising seas, cometary displays, volcanic winters, these phenomena inspire awe and fear. Oral traditions can preserve such events across generations, as seen in Aboriginal Australian stories describing coastal landscapes that geological studies confirm were inundated thousands of years ago. Memory does not require writing. It requires continuity of telling. Still, myth also reflects psychological archetypes. Carl Jung proposed that certain symbolic structures emerge from shared aspects of the human psyche. Floods cleanse, heroes rebuild, teachers enlighten. These are metaphors of renewal. Yet metaphor does not exclude historical substrate. A single catastrophic event, experienced by multiple groups, could seed diverse symbolic interpretations. Astronomical events have also been woven into narrative. Comets blazing across the sky, meteor showers, solar eclipses, all capable of generating fear and reverence. Some proponents of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggest that fragments of a comet struck North America around 12,800 years ago, leaving behind microspherules and platinum anomalies. The hypothesis remains contested. Yet if such an event occurred, its visual spectacle would have been unforgettable. Oral traditions describing fire from the sky might not be pure invention. Ancient cosmologies often embed astronomical knowledge in symbolic form. The Egyptian goddess Nut arching over the earth, the Mayan Popol Vuh describing celestial cycles, the alignment of pyramids to Orion's belt as proposed by Robert Bauval. Controversial, yet widely discussed. Mainstream Egyptology disputes the intentionality of certain stellar correlations, emphasizing archaeological context over speculative geometry. The tension between interpretation and evidence remains constant. There is a delicate balance between respecting myth as cultural expression and extracting potential historical signals. Overreach risks distortion. Dismissal risks blindness. When myths from distant cultures share structural similarities, One must ask whether parallel development suffices as explanation. Human societies independently domesticated crops in multiple regions. Perhaps they also independently developed flood narratives. Yet the recurrence invites contemplation. In the Andes, pre-Inca civilizations like Tiwanaku and Wari constructed monumental architecture long before the Inca Empire. Tiwanaku's precise stonework and solar alignments suggest accumulated astronomical awareness. Some fringe theories have attempted to date Tiwanaku to implausibly ancient epochs based on archaeo-astronomical speculation. Most scholars reject such dating, citing stratigraphy and radiocarbon evidence placing the site around 500 to 1000 CE. The controversy illustrates a broader pattern. Legitimate wonder sometimes fuels exaggerated claims, and yet, within careful scholarship there remains acknowledgement of gaps. The transition from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agriculturalists occurred in multiple centres around 10,000 BCE. The reasons are complex: climate stabilisation, plant domestication, social pressures. But the simultaneity across regions is striking. It suggests either convergent adaptation to environmental change or diffusion of ideas through networks now poorly understood. Memory can fragment when populations disperse. Language shifts. Symbols morph. A teacher becomes a god. A flood becomes divine judgment. An astronomical cycle becomes prophecy. Over centuries, layers accumulate. Separating sediment from signal becomes nearly impossible. Perhaps the deeper question is not whether myths encode advanced technologies in literal terms, but whether they hint at knowledge systems now reduced to allegory. Agricultural calendars, once vital, become festival dates. Observations of procession become zodiacal myth. Acoustic practices become sacred chant devoid of technical framing. In many cultures, initiation into knowledge required ritual. Secrecy preserved authority. When institutions collapse, esoteric teachings vanish first. The public myth survives. The technical understanding dissipates. It is a quieter form of loss than physical destruction, but loss nonetheless. The mind lingers on continuity again. If knowledge once travelled through oral lineages and ritual schools along coasts now submerged, then catastrophe would fracture transmission. Survivors inland would preserve fragments, reinterpreting them through new contexts. Over generations, coherence would fade. As the stories circulate softly in the dark, of waters rising, of teachers returning, of ages ending, they do not demand belief. They invite reflection. If myth is the echo of experience filtered through time, what experiences were profound enough to echo across continents? And if advanced understanding once existed in forms we no longer recognize as technical, might its remnants be hiding not in machines, but in the quiet persistence of story itself? If myth preserves memory and stone preserves geometry, then texts preserve intention, or at least the impression of it. And yet texts are fragile. They burn. They rot. They are rewritten. The story of lost technology may not only be one of drowned coastlines or shattered monuments, but of manuscripts silenced quietly, incrementally, under the weight of authority or neglect. In Hellenistic Egypt, the Library of Alexandria gathered scrolls from across the known world. Estimates of its holdings range wildly, from tens of thousands to several 100,000 works. The number matters less than the principle. Concentrated knowledge, mathematics from Greece, astronomy from Babylon, medical treatises, philosophical dialogues, a synthesis of intellectual traditions. Its destruction did not occur in a single blaze as popular imagination suggests. It likely declined over centuries, affected by political upheaval, Roman conflict, Christian edicts, and simple decay. Yet the symbolism remains. When centralized knowledge fragments, what disappears may not be immediately recognized as essential. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in 1901 within a Roman shipwreck, startled historians because it did not fit the expected technological gradient. Dated to around 100 BCE, the device contained intricate bronze gears modelling lunar and solar cycles, even predicting eclipses. X-ray tomography revealed inscriptions referencing the Olympiad cycle and planetary movements. Nothing of comparable mechanical complexity survived in Europe until medieval clockwork emerged over a millennium later. Was the mechanism an isolated marvel crafted by a singular genius? Or was it one surviving piece of a broader Hellenistic tradition now mostly lost? Archimedes of Syracuse, writing in the 3rd century BCE, described devices that harnessed geometry and leverage with astonishing sophistication. Later accounts credit him with constructing planetariums, mechanical representations of celestial motion. His treatises were nearly lost, rediscovered in palimpsests overwritten by medieval monks. Only through modern imaging were hidden diagrams revealed beneath layers of devotional text. Knowledge can survive invisibly, concealed by subsequent priorities. In Roman times, engineers developed hydraulic concrete capable of resisting seawater corrosion. Modern analysis shows that volcanic ash combined with lime produce self-healing chemical reactions within the material. For centuries, the precise formulation faded from common practice. Only recently have material scientists fully understood the microstructural processes at work. The technology was not mystical, it was empirical, and yet it was forgotten. The Baghdad Battery, unearthed in Iraq and dated to the Parthian period, consists of a ceramic jar, copper cylinder, and iron rod. Some researchers proposed it functioned as a primitive galvanic cell capable of generating small electrical currents. Others argue it may have served as a storage vessel for scrolls or ritual objects. The debate illustrates how artifacts resist singular interpretation. If ancient experimentation with electrochemistry occurred, it left no surviving technical corpus explaining its application. Absence of context complicates certainty. Chinese antiquity also contains references to remarkable inventions. The seismoscope attributed to Zhang Heng in the 2nd century CE reportedly detected distant earthquakes through pendulum mechanisms. Descriptions survive in texts, though the original device does not. Reconstructed models suggest plausible functionality. Here again, documentation hints at ingenuity, exceeding surviving material evidence. Transmission of knowledge depends not only on invention but on preservation. When the Western Roman Empire declined, literacy rates dropped in parts of Europe. Manuscripts were copied selectively in monasteries. Works deemed pagan or unnecessary were sometimes neglected. Islamic scholars during the Golden Age preserved and expanded upon Greek scientific texts, translating them into Arabic and later reintroducing them to Europe. Without that chain, certain classical works might have vanished entirely. Authority shapes memory. The formation of religious canon involved councils determining which texts were orthodox and which apocryphal. Gnostic writings, many discovered in the Nag Hammadi library in 1945, had been suppressed for centuries. Their theological content challenged emerging orthodoxy. Whether any suppressed texts contained technical knowledge is unlikely. Most were spiritual treatises. Yet the precedent of selective preservation demonstrates how easily alternative strands of thought can disappear. There is also the quiet erosion of indigenous knowledge under colonial expansion. Navigation techniques of Polynesian wayfinders, based on star paths and ocean swells, were transmitted orally. When missionary influence discouraged traditional practices, portions of that knowledge nearly vanished. Only deliberate cultural revival restored fragments. If complex ecological or astronomical systems once existed in coastal societies later displaced, their disappearance might leave little trace in written archives. One must tread carefully to avoid romanticizing loss. Not every missing manuscript concealed revolutionary science. Many likely repeated familiar themes. But cumulative disappearance alters the texture of intellectual history. It creates gaps that later generations mistake for absence of prior capability. Censorship need not be conspiratorial. Political instability, economic collapse, shifting languages, these factors alone can extinguish traditions. The Maya developed a sophisticated calendrical system and hieroglyphic script. Following Spanish conquest, codices were burned by clergy such as Bishop Diego de Landa, who considered them idolatrous. Only 4 pre-Columbian Maya codices survive today. What astronomical records, agricultural treatises, or mytho-historical accounts were lost in those fires cannot be fully reconstructed. Even within modern times, archives have perished in war. The destruction of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad during the Mongol invasion of 1258 symbolized the obliteration of centuries of scholarship. Rivers reportedly ran black with ink. Whether literal or metaphorical, the image captures intellectual devastation. If advanced technologies once existed in forms not immediately recognizable as industrial, their documentation may have been fragile. Papyrus, parchment, oral instruction. Catastrophe, whether climatic or political, would fracture continuity. Later societies might inherit monuments without manuals. The question then shifts subtly. Rather than asking whether lost high technology once rivaled modern machinery, one might ask how many cycles of innovation and forgetting have shaped the human story. Linear progress comforts the present. Cyclical memory complicates it. As texts fade and reappear through palimpsests and rediscoveries, the sense of incompleteness persists. Each recovered manuscript expands understanding, yet also highlights what remains missing. The silence between surviving works feels heavy, and so, in the dim light of preserved parchment and corroded bronze gears, a quieter inquiry emerges. If knowledge has repeatedly slipped through the fingers of time, not erased deliberately but thinned by circumstance, how confident can any era be in declaring itself the beginning of advancement? And what fragments of our own understanding might one day survive without context, puzzling distant minds who search our ruins for intention? If texts can vanish and monuments can erode, then perhaps the most fragile archive of all is the sky itself, not the stars which endure, but the interpretations mapped upon them. Astronomy leaves no fossil. It survives only in alignment, in myth, in numbers carved quietly into stone. And when those who track the heavens disappear, the sky remains indifferent, its patterns waiting for new observers. The ancient world was attentive to celestial cycles in ways that feel both foreign and intimate. In Mesopotamia, Babylonian astronomers recorded planetary motions with remarkable precision. Clay tablets such as the MUL, a PIN series catalogued star positions and rising times. Their observations laid groundwork for predictive models of eclipses and planetary conjunctions. These were not primitive approximations. They were systematic, cumulative, refined over generations. Yet even within that careful record there are shadows. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis over approximately 26,000 years, was formally described by Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE. He noticed that star positions shifted gradually relative to equinox points. This discovery implies comparison of observations separated by centuries. It suggests access to older datasets. Whether Hipparchus independently discerned precession through meticulous measurement or inherited earlier records remains debated. The question lingers quietly. How far back did consistent observation truly extend? Some researchers have proposed that certain mythological motifs encode awareness of precession. The transition from one zodiacal age to another, Taurus to Aries, Aries to Pisces, has been interpreted symbolically in art and religious iconography. Mainstream scholarship remains cautious, warning against retrofitting astronomical meaning into broad symbolic shifts. Yet the persistence of bull imagery in Neolithic Europe and the later prominence of ram symbolism in Near Eastern cultures create patterns that invite contemplation. Correlation is not causation. Still, patterns accumulate. In Egypt, temple orientations often align with specific stellar events. The Temple of Amun at Karnak aligns with winter solstice sunrise. The so-called Dendera zodiac, carved during the Ptolemaic period, depicts constellations in a circular relief. Though not evidence of hidden science beyond established Egyptian astronomy, it reveals cosmological sophistication integrated into architecture. Astronomy was not an abstract pursuit. It structured ritual, agriculture, kingship. Across the Atlantic, the Maya developed one of the most precise calendrical systems in the ancient world. The Dresden Codex contains tables predicting solar eclipses and Venus cycles with astonishing accuracy. The long count calendar measures vast spans of time, extending thousands of years into the past and future. This temporal scale reflects a worldview attuned to cosmic recurrence. When Spanish clerics burned most Maya codices in the 16th century, they extinguished centuries of accumulated astronomical insight. What survives hints at what was lost. Stonehenge's alignment to solstitial sunrise and sunset is well known, but its deeper purpose remains debated. Was it a burial site, a ceremonial centre, an astronomical observatory, or all of these intertwined? The Bluestone's transport from Wales suggests intentionality beyond convenience. Alignment requires foresight, measurement, and repeated observation. It is not accidental. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across desert plains, enormous geoglyphs visible primarily from the air. Some depict animals, others form straight lines extending for kilometres. Archaeologists interpret them as ritual pathways associated with water cults. The idea that they served as astronomical markers has been both proposed and critiqued. While certain alignments correspond to celestial events, comprehensive astronomical function remains unproven. Yet the scale alone implies collective coordination guided by meaning. Astronomy binds cultures separated by geography because the sky is shared. But the interpretation of that sky evolves. When oral traditions fracture, the continuity of precise observation may falter. Precession, unfolding over millennia, would be nearly imperceptible without sustained record-keeping. If such records were interrupted by catastrophe or social upheaval, knowledge of slow celestial cycles could dissipate within generations. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, though controversial, raises the possibility of an abrupt celestial event imprinting itself upon collective memory. If fragments of a comet disintegrated over ice sheets, igniting wildfires and destabilizing climate, the spectacle would have been overwhelming. Some researchers point to platinum anomalies and microspherules in sediment layers dating to that period. Critics challenge methodology and reproducibility. The debate remains unresolved. Yet even without impact, the climate shift at the end of the Ice Age was dramatic. Rising temperatures, melting glaciers, shifting rainfall patterns. The sky itself may have seemed altered. In many cultures, knowledge of the heavens conferred authority. Priest astronomers predicted eclipses, reinforcing legitimacy. When institutions collapse, their observational continuity collapses as well. Later generations might inherit myths of star beings and cosmic cycles without retaining the measurement techniques that once underpinned them. Modern astronomy, armed with telescopes and satellites, often frames ancient skywatching as embryonic science. Yet the patience required to track planetary retrograde motion without instruments suggests intellectual discipline. Knowledge does not require silicon circuits. It requires time, memory, and transmission. If coastal academies once existed, whether literal schools or loosely organized networks of observers, rising seas could have erased them. Survivors inland might preserve fragments of cosmology, but lack full computational frameworks. Over centuries, mythologized interpretations would replace technical ones. There is also the question of orientation embedded in megalithic architecture across disparate regions. Some researchers have noted potential global patterns in alignment to certain stars or cardinal directions. Others argue that cardinal alignment emerges naturally in human spatial cognition. The tension persists between pattern recognition and projection. What remains undeniable is that ancient peoples invested enormous effort in encoding celestial cycles into durable mediums: stone, temple axes, carved reliefs. Such investment implies perceived importance beyond aesthetic preference. The sky structured time, ritual, navigation, identity. And yet, if observational traditions were once more continuous than surviving texts suggest, their interruption may have created the illusion of sudden discovery in later epochs. Renaissance astronomers built upon classical sources, which themselves drew upon older Babylonian and Egyptian records, layers upon layers, some visible, others faint. As the stars continue their patient drift and the axis of Earth traces its slow circle, one might wonder, how many cycles have unfolded unrecorded? How many observations were once made and then forgotten? If advanced understanding of cosmic rhythms existed in forms now fragmented into myth and monument, what would it take to recognize it? Not as lost magic, but as patient science eroded by time. If the sky once served as archive and ocean as eraser, then the Earth's crust itself may hold a deeper chronicle, written not in script but in catastrophe. Geological layers are patient witnesses. They record impacts, eruptions, extinctions, reversals, yet human timelines often skim across their surface, compressing vast upheavals into footnotes. What if the interruptions in cultural continuity mirror interruptions in climate more closely than commonly acknowledged? The end of the last ice age was not a gentle thaw. Ice cores extracted from Greenland revealed temperature fluctuations of astonishing rapidity during the Younger Dryas. Within decades, conditions shifted dramatically. Ecosystems destabilized. Megafauna disappeared across continents. The causes remain debated. Some point to ocean circulation changes disrupting heat distribution. Others propose extraterrestrial impact fragments igniting wildfires and darkening skies. The presence of microspherules and elevated platinum levels in certain sediment layers has fueled discussion, though consensus remains elusive. Regardless of cause, the environmental stress would have tested any human settlement, advanced or otherwise. Coastal communities would have faced encroaching waters. Inland groups confronted altered rainfall patterns and migrating herds. Social structures strain under ecological pressure. Knowledge transmission depends on stability. When survival becomes immediate, long-term continuity falters. The eruption of Toba approximately 74,000 years ago provides an earlier example of global disruption. The supervolcano in present-day Indonesia expelled immense quantities of ash, potentially causing a volcanic winter. Genetic studies once suggested a human population bottleneck around this period, though newer research questions the severity of the reduction. Even so, volcanic winters reduce sunlight, disrupt agriculture, and alter migration patterns. If smaller scale yet significant eruptions occurred during later periods, they too could fracture developing societies. The Santorini eruption around 1600 BCE devastated the Minoan civilization on Crete. Ash blanketed the region, tsunamis struck coastal settlements, and trade networks faltered. Within centuries, Minoan prominence diminished. While not total extinction, the event illustrates how interconnected systems can unravel when environmental shock intersects with political vulnerability. Climate events ripple outward. The 2-kiloyear event, a period of severe aridity around 2200 BCE, coincided with the decline of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia and disruptions in Egypt's Old Kingdom. Drought undermines agriculture. Famine erodes authority. The collapse of complex societies often appears sudden in historical record, yet geological proxies reveal gradual stress preceding visible fracture. If advanced knowledge systems once existed in fragile coastal nodes, Cumulative climate oscillations could erase them incrementally. Unlike singular cataclysms dramatised in myth, gradual sea level rise over centuries might leave few dramatic ruins, only retreat, adaptation, abandonment. Some researchers have explored correlations between solar cycles and climatic shifts. Variations in solar irradiance, though subtle, can influence atmospheric dynamics. The Maunder minimum in the 17th century coincided with the Little Ice Age in parts of Europe. Earlier fluctuations, less well documented, may have influenced agricultural stability. Ancient observers tracking sunspots or solar behaviour would have lacked modern instruments, yet unusual celestial phenomena rarely go unnoticed. Magnetic pole reversals also punctuate geological history, though they unfold over thousands of years and are unlikely to cause sudden catastrophe. Still, shifts in geomagnetic intensity can affect atmospheric radiation exposure. The Lachamp excursion around 42,000 years ago involved a temporary weakening of Earth's magnetic field. Some studies suggest increased auroral activity and potential climatic impact. Whether such phenomena significantly affected human populations remains debated, yet they add texture to the environmental backdrop of prehistory. There is a quiet humility in recognizing how often environmental forces reshape civilization. When glaciers melt, when monsoons fail, when rivers change course, societies must adapt or dissolve. The Indus Valley civilization, once thriving with urban planning and drainage systems, gradually declined around 1900 BCE, possibly influenced by shifting river patterns and aridification. Its script remains undeciphered. Without linguistic key, its intellectual achievements remain partially veiled. The mind resists imagining advanced understanding erased by mud and drought. Modern infrastructure fosters a sense of permanence, yet even within recorded history, collapse has recurred. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE saw the fall of Mycenaean Greece, the Hittite Empire, and disruptions across the eastern Mediterranean. Complex trade networks unravelled. Literacy diminished in some regions. The causes likely included drought, migration, warfare, systemic fragility, a convergence rather than a single trigger. If similar convergences occurred at the close of the Ice Age, when climate instability was even more pronounced, early complex societies might have fractured before leaving abundant durable traces. Knowledge concentrated in specialist classes could dissipate rapidly when those classes were displaced or extinguished. Geology does not conspire, it shifts according to physical law. Yet its indifference can feel almost deliberate when measured against human aspiration. The Earth recycles its crust through plate tectonics, sediment buries settlements, forest reclaims stone, rivers carve through memory. There is also the possibility that certain knowledge systems were resilient precisely because they were decentralized. Agricultural techniques passed through family lines survive drought better than centralized academies dependent on stability. Monumental construction, however, requires surplus and coordination. When surplus vanishes, monumentality ceases. If advanced technologies once existed as integrated ecological understanding, water management, seasonal calibration, astronomical mapping, then climate stress would test their adaptability. Some might evolve, others might vanish. As night settles and the thought deepens, one recognizes that catastrophe need not be apocalyptic to be transformative. Incremental stress can erase as effectively as fire. The geological record whispers of repeated upheaval, not singular endings. And so a question emerges quietly from the strata. If the Earth has cycled through abrupt cold snaps, volcanic winters, droughts, and rising seas, each capable of fracturing societies, how many times has knowledge been forced to retreat, to condense into myth and fragment, awaiting more stable eras to re-emerge? And if our own era rests upon climatic balance more delicate than assumed, What confidence can we hold that continuity will remain unbroken? If climate can thin civilizations and stone can outlast memory, then there remains another possibility. Quieter, more human. Not catastrophe from sky or sea, but the deliberate shaping of narrative. History is not only what happens, it is what is recorded, curated, interpreted, and taught. Between event and memory stands the scribe, the archivist, the council, the empire. Every empire inherits ruins. Rome absorbed Greek philosophy and Egyptian symbolism. Christian Europe preserved fragments of classical thought, while reframing them within new theological structures. Islamic scholars translated and expanded upon Aristotle and Ptolemy, integrating them into a cosmology aligned with revelation. In each case, knowledge survived, but refracted. Selection is not inherently sinister. Canon formation requires boundaries. Educational systems simplify to function. Yet simplification can harden into orthodoxy. When orthodoxy solidifies, anomalies become inconvenient. During the early centuries of Christianity, debates over doctrine were intense. Councils such as Nicaea sought theological coherence. Texts that diverged from emerging consensus were marginalized or destroyed. The Nag Hammadi discoveries in 1945 revealed a trove of Gnostic writings hidden for centuries. These texts did not contain advanced engineering secrets, yet their suppression illustrates how intellectual plurality narrows under consolidation. Similarly, when Spanish clergy arrived in the Americas, many indigenous codices were burned, deemed idolatrous. Bishop Diego de Landa later expressed regret, but the loss was irreversible. Surviving Maya codices hint at astronomical precision, ritual calendars, and mythic cosmology. What detailed observational records perished in those fires remains unknowable. The Qin dynasty in China famously burned books and buried scholars during its effort to standardize thought in the 3rd century BCE. While later historians debate the scale of destruction, the episode symbolizes the vulnerability of intellectual diversity under centralized authority. Even outside explicit suppression, institutional inertia shapes interpretation. When archaeologists in the early 20th century uncovered Göbekli Tepe, its age challenged prevailing models that agriculture preceded monumental construction. Initial resistance was not conspiratorial. It reflected entrenched frameworks. Paradigms resist revision until evidence accumulates sufficiently to force adaptation. Thomas Kuhn described scientific revolutions as shifts in paradigm rather than smooth progressions. Anomalies accumulate quietly until existing theory can no longer contain them. Then reinterpretation unfolds. In this sense, history itself undergoes revision not through secrecy, but through gradual re-evaluation. Yet power influences which anomalies receive attention. Funding, political context, cultural identity. These factors guide research priorities. If certain hypotheses threaten national narratives or religious tradition, they may encounter greater scrutiny. Scrutiny is healthy. Suppression is not. Distinguishing between the two can be subtle. There is also the matter of translation. Ancient languages carry concepts without modern equivalents. When early translators rendered Sumerian or Egyptian texts into Greek or Latin, interpretive layers accumulated. Later scholars translated those translations. Nuance can erode. A technical term might become symbolic. A symbolic phrase might be literalized. Colonial archaeology sometimes interpreted non-European civilizations through Eurocentric assumptions, underestimating indigenous sophistication. Over time, reassessment corrected many biases. The Great Zimbabwe ruins were once attributed to foreign builders by European explorers unwilling to credit African engineering. Modern scholarship recognizes them as indigenous achievements. Here, suppression was less organized than implicit, shaped by worldview. If advanced knowledge once existed in marginalized cultures, later overshadowed by imperial expansion, its erasure may have been unintentional yet consequential. Oral traditions dismissed as myth may have encoded practical understanding dismissed as superstition. The printing press democratized knowledge, yet also standardized it. Once texts are widely reproduced, alternative manuscripts recede. Standardization enhances clarity but narrows variability. Earlier eras of manuscript culture allowed greater textual fluidity. There is a temptation to imagine secret archives containing forbidden technologies deliberately concealed. While such dramatic concealment lacks substantive evidence, quieter forms of omission are historically documented. Political regimes manipulate narrative to legitimize authority. Soviet historiography reframed events to align with ideology. Colonial powers often minimized indigenous accomplishments. Revisionism is not rare. It is intrinsic to power. Still, caution is required. The absence of evidence for vast hidden technologies within official archives suggests that large-scale suppression of revolutionary science is improbable. Conspiracies of that magnitude are difficult to sustain across centuries without leakage. Yet smaller-scale losses shaped by war, neglect, bias, and prioritization are entirely plausible. What emerges is less a tale of malevolent secrecy and more one of layered filtering. Knowledge passes through gates, some intentional, some structural. Each gate narrows, reshapes, reframes. If a coastal civilization once developed integrated astronomical and architectural systems, and later collapsed under climatic stress, subsequent cultures might inherit fragments. Those fragments would be interpreted through new cosmologies, recorded selectively, perhaps simplified, and then, centuries later, modern scholars would reconstruct timelines from surviving fragments, unaware of the missing links, not because they were hidden in vaults, but because they never reached the archive intact. The thought is neither accusatory nor reassuring. It is simply human. History is mediated by perspective. As the narrative winds softly through councils, conquests, and quieter missions, one question remains suspended. If what we know of the past has passed through so many hands, copied, translated, selected, reframed, how much of its original texture remains? And if advanced understanding once flickered briefly before being absorbed into new orders, would we recognize it now, or would we call it myth and move on? If power filters memory and climate fractures continuity, then there remains one more dimension to consider: the nature of technology itself. Modern thought often equates advancement with machinery, with metal and circuitry, with visible infrastructure. Yet technology at its root is applied knowledge. It is method, it is process, it is the ability to shape environment with intention. And such shaping does not always leave behind obvious relics. Consider acoustics. In Malta, within the subterranean chambers of the Halsaflieni Hypogeum, certain rooms resonate at frequencies around 110 Hz. Experiments conducted by researchers in recent decades observed that vocal tones at this frequency amplify and create vibrational effects felt throughout the body. Whether the builders intentionally tuned the chamber to that resonance remains debated. Yet the phenomenon exists. Stone can be shaped to alter sound. In Egypt, the so-called King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid exhibits acoustic properties that generate standing waves when stimulated by certain frequencies. Modern experiments have demonstrated that granite and limestone respond differently to vibration. It would be unwarranted to claim that ancient Egyptians engineered pyramids as energy devices. No credible evidence supports such assertions. Yet the experiential awareness of resonance may have informed architectural design. If so, such awareness represents empirical knowledge, one not encoded in manuals but embodied in practice. Water management provides another lens. The ancient Nabateans of Petra engineered sophisticated hydraulic systems within a desert environment. Channels, dams, and cisterns captured flash floods and directed water into reservoirs. This was not accidental ingenuity. It required understanding of seasonal rainfall, gravity, and erosion. Similarly, The Karnat systems of Persia transported groundwater across vast distances through gently sloping tunnels. Some Karnats remain functional after millennia. These are technologies of sustainability, less visible than bronze weapons but equally advanced. In the Andes, pre-Inca civilizations constructed terraced agriculture on mountain slopes, preventing erosion while maximizing arable land. The Waru raised fields around Lake Titicaca moderated frost by retaining water that released heat at night. These systems demonstrate climatic adaptation rooted in observation and iteration. When colonial disruption displaced indigenous agricultural practices, some of this knowledge faded, only to be rediscovered by modern agronomists. Metallurgy, too, contains quiet sophistication. The Iron Pillar of Delhi, dating to the Gupta period, has resisted corrosion for over 1,600 years. Its composition and forging technique created a passive protective film inhibiting rust. Ancient Indian metallurgists may not have articulated corrosion chemistry in modern terms, yet their empirical mastery achieved remarkable durability. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec carved colossal heads from basalt transported across considerable distances. While not indicative of lost industrial machinery, the logistical coordination and sculptural precision suggest organized labor and technical skill. There are also technologies of time. The Andean quipu, knotted cords used by the Inca, functioned as recording devices for numerical data. Scholars debate whether quipu encoded narrative information beyond accounting. If so, an entire textual tradition may have existed in fibre rather than ink. When Spanish authorities suppressed quipu use, fearing its administrative power, interpretive continuity fractured. Without trained readers, the cords became enigmatic. Advanced does not always imply lost in the dramatic sense. It may mean underappreciated. It may mean contextualized as ritual rather than engineering. Even in medicine, ancient practices reflect layered understanding. Egyptian papyri describe surgical procedures and wound treatments. Ayurvedic texts outline diagnostic systems rooted in observation of physiology. Chinese medicine documented pulse analysis and herbal pharmacology. Some methods lack empirical validation by modern standards. Others demonstrate practical efficacy. Knowledge systems evolve. Yet when lineages are interrupted, nuance dissipates. The question then shifts subtly. If advanced technologies once flourished in forms integrated with ecology and ritual, their remnants might appear symbolic to later observers. A stone alignment becomes sacred site rather than astronomical instrument. A resonant chamber becomes temple rather than acoustic laboratory. A knotted cord becomes artifact rather than archive. Industrial technology leaves behind slag heaps and plastic. Earlier forms may leave only pattern. One must guard against projecting modern fantasies onto ancient contexts. Claims of lost high-tech civilizations wielding lasers or electricity beyond evidence undermine legitimate inquiry. Yet dismissing all complexity beyond conventional narrative risks another error: underestimation. Archaeology advances incrementally. LiDAR surveys beneath jungle canopy have revealed extensive Maya urban networks, previously concealed by vegetation. What appeared sparse becomes dense under new technology. The Amazon basin, once thought incapable of supporting complex societies, now yields evidence of engineered earthworks and geometric enclosures. These findings do not rewrite all history, but they refine it. Technology shapes what is visible. Satellite imagery, underwater drones, ground-penetrating radar. Each tool expands perception. What we interpret as absence today may reflect limitations of method rather than reality. If earlier societies possessed integrated knowledge systems harmonized with environment, their decline might not leave dramatic ruins. It might leave altered landscapes, terraced hills, redirected rivers, subtle alignments. And so the thought deepens gently. Perhaps the question is not whether ancient civilizations possessed technology rivaling ours, but whether they cultivated forms of knowledge whose sophistication we are only beginning to recognize through new lenses. If so, then loss is not total. It is layered, awaiting reinterpretation. As the mind drifts through resonant chambers and silent terraces, a final inquiry lingers softly in the dark. If technology is simply applied understanding shaped by context, what forms of understanding once flourished that we no longer perceive as technological at all? And if our own era's achievements are measured primarily in metal and code, might we overlook quieter advancements buried beneath stone and story? If technology can be subtle and knowledge can be misread as myth, then perhaps the deepest question is not what was lost, but how cycles themselves operate. Civilizations do not simply rise and fall at random. Patterns appear: growth, complexity, overextension, contraction, reinvention. The rhythm is not perfectly symmetrical, yet it recurs with unsettling familiarity. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE remains one of the most studied examples. Within a few decades, palace economies across the eastern Mediterranean unravelled. The Mycenaean kingdoms declined. The Hittite Empire fragmented. Trade routes connecting Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant fractured. Written scripts such as Linear B disappeared from use. For centuries afterward, Greece entered a period often described as a dark age, marked by reduced literacy and smaller settlements. No single cause explains the collapse. Drought, migration of the so-called sea peoples, internal rebellion, systemic fragility, each likely contributed. What is striking is not the disaster itself, but the contraction of complexity. Skills once commonplace became rare. Writing systems vanished. Monumental architecture slowed. Knowledge did not evaporate entirely, but it thinned. Centuries later, classical Greece would flourish, rediscovering literacy through the adoption of the Phoenician alphabet. Philosophy and mathematics would blossom anew. To an observer lacking records of the intervening centuries, it might appear as sudden genius. Yet between collapse and Renaissance lay continuity, quieter, fragmented, often oral. Rome followed a similar arc. At its height, the empire maintained roads spanning thousands of kilometres, aqueducts delivering water with precise gradients, and administrative systems coordinating vast territories. When the Western Empire declined, infrastructure decayed. Stone from public buildings was repurposed. Urban population shrank. Technical manuals survived unevenly. Aqueduct repair became rare. Over generations, once familiar systems became relics. Yet knowledge persisted elsewhere. In Byzantium, Roman law and engineering traditions endured. In the Islamic world, scholars translated and expanded upon classical science. The narrative of loss depends on perspective. Collapse in one region may coincide with preservation in another. This pattern complicates the idea of singular disappearance. Advanced understanding may not vanish globally. It may migrate, reconfigure, adapt. Climate again threads through these cycles. The late antique Little Ice Age between 536 and 660 CE, potentially triggered by volcanic eruptions, brought cooler temperatures and crop failures. Some historians correlate this period with political instability across Eurasia. Environmental stress amplifies existing vulnerabilities. Systems strained by inequality or overextension fracture more readily under climatic pressure. The Maya experienced cycles of urban expansion and abandonment. Cities in the southern lowlands declined around the 9th century CE. Drought evidence from lake sediments suggests prolonged aridity. Yet Maya civilization did not vanish. Populations shifted northward. Cultural identity persisted despite political collapse. The Indus Valley civilization faded gradually, its urban centres depopulating as river systems changed course. Its script remains undeciphered. Without readable texts, its intellectual legacy is partially obscured. Was advanced hydrological knowledge lost or integrated into successor cultures? The silence leaves room for contemplation. Even within modernity, systemic fragility reveals itself. Global supply chains stretch across continents. Digital archives store immense quantities of information, yet reliance on electricity and network stability introduces vulnerability. A sustained technological disruption could sever access to data quickly. Without power, digital libraries become inaccessible. Knowledge encoded in fragile media requires maintenance. Ancient societies may have relied on similarly delicate frameworks, not electronic, but institutional. When those frameworks faltered, accumulated expertise dispersed. The philosopher Giambattista Vico proposed that societies move through cyclical stages: divine, heroic, human, then collapse into barbarism before renewal. While overly schematic, his intuition resonates with historical observation. Linear progress is comforting. Cyclical rhythm feels less stable. If advanced technologies once existed in forms adapted to specific environmental contexts, their survival would depend on those contexts remaining stable. A maritime civilization reliant on predictable tides and currents would struggle if sea levels rose rapidly. A riverine culture dependent on annual floods would falter if drought persisted. Cycles also operate culturally. Innovation thrives under certain social conditions: relative stability, surplus resources, intellectual exchange. When fear dominates or isolation increases, experimentation declines. The possibility emerges quietly. What if humanity has experienced multiple localized cycles of high integration and subsequent contraction long before recorded history? Not global empires spanning continents, but regional networks of advanced ecological and astronomical knowledge that flourished briefly before environmental or social disruption. Such cycles would leave uneven traces: a megalith here, an anomalous artifact there, myths echoing catastrophe. Over millennia, these traces blur into ambiguity. Modern archaeology often uncovers layers of settlement stacked atop one another, cities built over cities. Troy's multiple strata illustrate repeated habitation and destruction. Each layer once represented a living present, unaware of becoming archaeology. The Earth's capacity for renewal complicates permanence. Forest reclaims terrace, sand buries harbour, coral envelops stone. And yet, awareness of cyclical fragility need not breed fatalism. It may foster humility. If complexity has contracted before, it can contract again. If knowledge has dispersed and reassembled across epochs, perhaps loss is not final, but transformative. As the thought settles into the quiet rhythm of rise and fall, another question emerges gently from within it. If civilizations are pulses rather than lines, if advancement accumulates and dissolves in recurring waves, then where within that rhythm does the present moment rest? At the crest of integration or at the edge of contraction? And if fragments of earlier pulses still lie embedded in stone and story, are they warnings or invitations to remember differently? If civilizations move in pulses, then perhaps there are deeper pulses still, not merely cultural, but cosmic. The Earth does not travel alone. It orbits within a solar system which itself orbits the centre of a galaxy. Over vast spans of time, gravitational influences shift subtly. Solar radiation fluctuates. Asteroids wander. These are not mystical forces, but physical realities unfolding beyond immediate perception. Throughout history, celestial events have altered the course of life on Earth. The Chicxulub impact 66 million years ago ended the reign of the dinosaurs. More recently, smaller impacts have left scars: the Barringer crater in Arizona, the Tunguska explosion in 1908 flattening forests in Siberia. These remind us that Earth's biosphere exists within a dynamic cosmic environment. Some researchers studying ice core samples and sediment layers have suggested periodic increases in extraterrestrial dust influx. Whether linked to cometary debris streams or asteroid belt perturbations, such influxes could influence climate. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, though contested, underscores how vulnerable Earth is to celestial intrusion. Even without dramatic impact, solar variability affects climate. Sunspot cycles follow approximately 11-year rhythms. Longer-term fluctuations in solar activity correlate loosely with temperature variations on Earth. The Maunder minimum between 1645 and 1715 coincided with colder winters in parts of Europe. Solar output is not constant. Its subtle modulation influences atmospheric dynamics, Blankovich cycles, variations in Earth's orbital eccentricity, axial tilt, and precession, drive glacial and interglacial periods over tens of thousands of years. These cycles shape long-term climate patterns. Ancient observers could not measure orbital eccentricity, yet they lived within its consequences. If advanced knowledge once included careful sky observation, integrated with seasonal planning, awareness of cyclical celestial patterns would have been vital. Over generations, correlations between unusual celestial phenomena and environmental change might have been noticed, even if not formally understood. Some ancient cultures described ages of the world corresponding to astronomical shifts. The Hindu concept of yugas portrays vast cycles of moral and cosmic change. The Greek notion of great year imagines celestial bodies returning to original positions after long intervals. Whether symbolic or observationally inspired, such ideas reflect sensitivity to recurrence beyond human lifespan. Modern astrophysics confirms that the solar system oscillates through the Milky Way's galactic plane over millions of years. Some hypotheses suggest increased cometary influx during such passages due to gravitational disturbances in the Oort cloud. While these timescales far exceed recorded history, they remind us that Earth's environment is not isolated from cosmic context. The thought may seem distant, abstract. Yet even subtle cosmic influences can ripple into tangible effects. Increased radiation exposure during geomagnetic field weakening, shifts in ultraviolet flux during solar variability. These factors subtly shape ecological systems. Could earlier civilizations have recognized recurring celestial cycles that coincided with climatic shifts? Perhaps not with modern precision, but through empirical correlation. A comet seen generations before a period of drought might become omen in story. Over centuries, omen becomes myth. The precession of the equinoxes itself gradually shifts the backdrop of constellations against which solstices occur. Over millennia, star alignments encoded in monuments drift. If ancient builders aligned structures to specific stellar events, those alignments would change slowly. Observers centuries later might notice deviation, interpreting it spiritually rather than astronomically. Modern researchers have explored potential alignments between megalithic sites and certain stars at particular epochs. While many claims exceed available evidence, the broader point remains. The sky is not static. It evolves on timescales that exceed individual lifetimes but not collective memory. If climatic stress, solar variability, and potential impact events periodically disrupted human societies, then the rhythm of civilization intertwines with cosmic rhythm. Knowledge systems attuned to these rhythms might have offered resilience, or at least explanation. Yet resilience requires continuity. When institutions collapse, even accurate astronomical frameworks can be forgotten. Later generations may reinterpret cosmic events as divine wrath or destiny rather than cyclical mechanics. There is also humility in recognizing how limited human timescales are compared to cosmic ones. Written history spans a few thousand years, orbital cycles span tens of thousands, galactic oscillations span millions. Within such expanses, multiple cultural rises and falls could occur unnoticed by distant stars. The possibility emerges quietly. Advanced lost technologies may not refer solely to devices or engineering, but to integrated awareness of Earth within cosmos, of cycles linking sky and climate. If such awareness once existed and forms later fragmented into ritual and myth, its technical coherence might be obscured. As the thought drifts upward toward constellations shifting imperceptibly through ages, one question lingers like a distant star just beyond immediate sight. If humanity's story is woven into cosmic cycles far older than civilization itself, how many times has awareness bloomed and dimmed under the same stars? And if knowledge of those rhythms once guided societies through instability, what remains of it now, scattered in legend, encoded in alignment, waiting quietly beneath the turning sky? If cosmic rhythms shape the earth, and cycles shape civilization, then perhaps the most unsettling possibility is not that knowledge was destroyed, but that it was transformed beyond recognition. Ideas do not always vanish. Sometimes they dissolve into symbol, ritual, architecture, language. Over centuries, their technical origins may fade while their forms persist. Sacred geometry offers one example: the recurrence of specific ratios and shapes in ancient architecture. The golden ratio in Greek temples, harmonic proportions in Gothic cathedrals, precise angular relationships in pyramidal structures, has inspired both serious mathematical study and exaggerated mysticism. It is clear that ancient builders understood proportion deeply. Whether they formalized it as abstract mathematics or applied it intuitively through apprenticeship remains debated. But proportion was not accidental. It structured space in ways perceived as harmonious. When knowledge of proportion is detached from its geometric foundations, it becomes aesthetic tradition. Builders replicate forms because they feel balanced, not necessarily because they calculate underlying ratios. Over time, technique may persist while theoretical explanation recedes. Language itself can obscure origins. The word planet derives from the Greek planets, meaning wanderer. Early observers recognized that certain lights moved against the backdrop of fixed stars. That empirical observation became embedded in language. If a culture tracked complex planetary cycles but later reduced them to astrological symbolism, the computational precision might be lost while mythic meaning endured. Ritual calendars illustrate similar transformation. Agricultural societies depended on accurate seasonal timing. Solstices and equinoxes structured planting and harvest. Over generations, these markers became festivals. The festival survives. The agricultural imperative may shift with climate or technology, yet the date remains anchored to celestial event. Consider the transition from oral epic to written scripture. Homeric poetry likely evolved from centuries of oral tradition before being recorded. During oral transmission, formulas preserved rhythm and content. Once written, fluidity narrowed, variation decreased. The living tradition condensed into text. If advanced ecological or astronomical knowledge once circulated through oral guilds, navigators reading stars and currents, architects calibrating resonance through chant, and those guilds dissolved. Later observers might inherit only fragments. Songs remain, methods fade, even symbols can invert. The swastika, once a widespread solar symbol across Eurasia, became indelibly associated with 20th century atrocity. Meaning can shift dramatically, severed from origin. Alchemy provides another lens. Medieval alchemists sought transmutation of base metals into gold. Modern chemistry recognizes their experimental groundwork in metallurgy and distillation. Alchemical texts often encoded practical procedures within symbolic language. When read literally, they appear mystical. When decoded contextually, they reveal empirical experimentation. If earlier traditions embedded technical processes within metaphor, later generations might misinterpret them as purely spiritual. The pyramidal form recurs globally: Egypt, Mesoamerica, Mesopotamia. Functional explanations vary. Tombs, temples, platforms. The stability of the pyramid shape makes it structurally sound, yet symbolic resonance often overlays engineering practicality. As centuries pass, symbolism may eclipse original functional nuance. Modern archaeology has reinterpreted many sites once labelled purely ceremonial. LIDAR surveys in the Amazon revealed geometric earthworks suggesting complex settlement planning, previously dismissed as impossible in tropical rainforest. The assumption of simplicity shaped interpretation. New data reshaped assumption. This pattern invites caution. What we classify today as ritual may contain embedded empirical understanding. What we classify as myth may encode environmental memory. Yet romantic projection must be avoided. Not every symbol conceals lost science. Discernment requires evidence, context, patience. There is also a psychological dimension. Humans seek continuity with origins. When gaps appear in history, imagination rushes to fill them. Responsible inquiry acknowledges uncertainty without collapsing into fantasy. Still, transformation rather than annihilation may explain many discontinuities. Knowledge diffuses, morphs, adapts. A once practical navigation chant becomes spiritual hymn. A structural proportion becomes sacred aesthetic. The process resembles sedimentation. Layers accumulate. Original substrate remains buried but not erased. Excavation requires careful removal of later accretions. Perhaps advanced lost technologies are not buried machines or forbidden archives, but earlier integrations of science and meaning. Modern thought often separates empirical from spiritual. Ancient cultures may not have drawn such boundaries. When integrated systems fragment, later observers struggle to reconstruct coherence. As night deepens and thought slows, an image arises quietly, not of hidden vaults, but of layered manuscripts, overwritten yet faintly legible beneath fresh ink. Beneath ritual, beneath architecture, beneath myth, there may linger traces of earlier synthesis, and so the question emerges softly from within this layering. If knowledge can transform into symbol, and practice can outlive explanation, how many of our inherited forms carry faint echoes of once explicit understanding? And if advanced awareness once moved seamlessly between sky, stone, and story, might its remnants be present even now, misunderstood not because they are secret, but because we no longer recognize the language in which they were first spoken? If knowledge can transform rather than vanish, then perhaps the most delicate thread in this long tapestry is consciousness itself. The human capacity to perceive patterns, to remember across generations, to ask questions that outlive immediate necessity. Advanced technology, in its deepest sense, may begin not with tools, but with awareness. Archaeological evidence increasingly suggests that symbolic behavior predates agriculture by tens of thousands of years. Cave paintings in Chauvet and Lascaux reveal not merely depictions of animals, but intentional placement within acoustic chambers, perhaps enhancing ritual experience. Pigments were chosen, surfaces prepared. The act was deliberate. These were not idle markings. They reflect minds capable of abstraction and narrative. Göbekli Tepe again challenges assumptions. Carved pillars bearing animal reliefs arranged in circular enclosures suggest communal effort long before settled farming became widespread. The builders were likely hunter-gatherers. Their capacity to coordinate labour at that scale implies social structures capable of shared vision. Whether the site functioned primarily as ritual centre or astronomical marker remains debated. Yet its existence reframes the timeline of complexity. Consciousness evolves not biologically at rapid pace, but culturally. Language expands conceptual range. Symbols condense experience into transmissible form. If early societies developed intricate cosmologies integrating environment and sky, those cosmologies would shape perception itself. Modern neuroscience recognizes that pattern recognition is intrinsic to human cognition. We are predisposed to detect order, even where randomness prevails. This capacity underlies science and superstition alike. The difference lies in method, in testing patterns against evidence. Ancient observers lacked telescopes, yet they possessed patience. Tracking lunar phases requires nightly attention. Mapping solstitial sunrise requires years of horizon watching. Such sustained observation cultivates a different relationship to time. If earlier civilizations nurtured heightened ecological awareness, sensing subtle shifts in wind, soil, water, their technologies may have been cognitive rather than mechanical. Memory palaces, oral epics, navigational star maps encoded in song, these are technologies of mind. Polynesian wayfinders navigated vast Pacific distances using stars, currents, bird behavior, and cloud formations. Their knowledge was internalized, embodied. When colonization disrupted apprenticeship lines, much of this navigation science nearly vanished. Only through cultural revival has it been partially restored. The Andean quipu, once administrative devices, may have encoded more than numbers. Some scholars propose narrative content embedded within knot structure and colour variation. Without trained interpreters, decoding remains challenging. A knowledge system exists, yet its key has faded. Perhaps the most advanced lost technology is not device, but integration. The seamless blending of environment, memory, and social coordination. When such integration fragments, artifacts alone cannot reconstruct it fully. Modernity often externalizes memory into written and digital archives. Cognitive burden shifts to devices. Earlier cultures internalized knowledge through repetition and ritual. Loss of ritual context could dissolve encoded understanding even if physical structures remain. This raises an unsettling thought. What if earlier societies cultivated mental frameworks enabling perception of patterns we no longer prioritize? Seasonal shifts once commanded immediate attention. Today, artificial lighting blurs night sky. Climate control dulls sensitivity to weather. If awareness itself can atrophy under new conditions, perhaps certain forms of ancient understanding have become inaccessible, not because they are hidden, but because our habits of perception differ. Yet romanticizing pre-modern consciousness would be misguided. Ancient life was harsh. Survival demands left little room for abstract contemplation beyond necessity. Still, evidence suggests intellectual richness within those constraints. The continuity of philosophical inquiry across cultures hints at persistent existential questioning. Egyptian wisdom literature, Greek philosophy, Indian Upanishads, Chinese Taoist texts, each grapples with order and impermanence. While not technological manuals, they reveal sustained reflection on reality structure. If advanced lost technologies include cognitive frameworks for interpreting cycles, cosmic, ecological, social, their disappearance might not leave ruins, it might leave shifts in worldview. There is humility in acknowledging how partial our reconstruction of ancient minds remains. Archaeology uncovers tools and bones, not thoughts. Texts preserve language, but tone and nuance fade. Perhaps the deepest archive is intergenerational memory itself, vulnerable to disruption, resilient in fragments. Catastrophe, conquest, disease can sever lines of teaching abruptly. Survivors rebuild with what remains. As this reflection settles gently into stillness, one final question glows faintly beneath it. If consciousness shapes technology as much as technology shapes consciousness, how many ways of seeing the world have risen and dimmed before ours? And if advanced understanding once resided not in machines but in cultivated perception, in attunement to sky, stone, and season, what would it mean to remember not the tools, but the way of seeing that once guided their use? If ways of seeing can be lost as easily as tools, then perhaps the final veil to consider is time itself, not merely as chronology, but as perception. Modern history arranges events in linear sequence, a steady ascent punctuated by setbacks. Yet archaeological discoveries often resist linear simplicity. They suggest parallel developments, forgotten experiments, branches that withered before flowering. Time compresses in textbooks. Millennia shrink into paragraphs. The distance between the construction of Göbekli Tepe and the building of the Great Pyramid spans thousands of years. longer than the span separating the Great Pyramid from the present. Yet in narrative, these epochs often blur, framed as steps along a single ladder. What if that ladder is incomplete? What if it resembles a braided river, splitting and rejoining, carving channels that vanish beneath sediment before resurfacing elsewhere? Consider how recently many assumptions have shifted. For much of the 20th century, the Amazon rainforest was believed incapable of supporting large, complex societies. The soil, thought too poor for sustained agriculture, seemed to preclude dense settlement. Yet discoveries of terra preta, anthropogenic dark earth enriched by charcoal and organic matter, reveal deliberate soil engineering. LIDAR surveys expose geometric earthworks, causeways, and urban planning beneath forest canopy. Entire networks of habitation once thrived where silence was presumed. This does not imply a forgotten industrial empire, but it does reveal how perception lags behind evidence. When data accumulates, history adjusts. Similarly, evidence from Southeast Asia shows early maritime trade routes extending far earlier than previously assumed. Obsidian sourcing, isotopic analysis, and genetic studies trace connections across islands and continents. These were not isolated communities drifting blindly. They navigated deliberately, exchanged goods, shared ideas. The chronology of metallurgy has also expanded. Copper smelting in the Balkans dates back to the 5th millennium BCE. Ironworking emerged independently in multiple regions. Innovation did not radiate from a single centre, it blossomed in parallel. Such multiplicity complicates any singular narrative of origin. It suggests that knowledge arises wherever conditions permit, and may disappear wherever conditions deteriorate. Time also obscures scale. A coastal settlement submerged 12,000 years ago lies beneath sediment and coral, indistinguishable without specialized survey. A wooden structure decays within centuries. Only stone endures, and even stone fractures. If advanced technologies once existed in materials less durable than granite, wood frameworks, fiber devices, organic composites, their traces may have dissolved entirely. Absence of remains cannot confirm absence of existence. There is an inherent bias toward what survives. Archaeology privileges durability. Written history privileges literacy. Oral knowledge and biodegradable tools vanish more easily, and yet patterns persist across continents. Monumental construction emerges independently in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, the Andes. Astronomy intertwines with ritual globally. Agriculture appears in multiple cradles within a few millennia of climatic stabilization. This simultaneity invites reflection. Were these parallel awakenings to similar environmental conditions, or were there earlier experiments whose traces lie beyond current excavation? Caution remains essential. Extraordinary claims demand robust evidence. To fill every gap with lost super-civilizations would betray discipline, but to ignore recurring anomalies would betray curiosity. Perhaps the most honest stance is one of patient openness. History is neither fixed nor endlessly malleable. It expands as tools refine perception. The Earth continues to reveal fragments. Each new discovery recalibrates understanding slightly. Not revolution, but refinement. As awareness settles into the quiet flow of time, a gentle tension remains unresolved. If our current model of the past is provisional, shaped by surviving fragments and interpretive frameworks, then how many chapters remain unwritten simply because their evidence lies buried beyond reach? And if advanced lost technologies are not singular dramatic artifacts but diffuse systems of integration, ecological, astronomical, cognitive, then perhaps their absence from mainstream narrative reflects not suppression, but incompleteness. Time, like ocean, conceals and reveals in cycles. As this penultimate layer rests softly upon those before it, one question lingers like a shoreline glimpsed through fog. If humanity's story is braided rather than linear, layered rather than ascending, then what confidence can any era claim in declaring itself uniquely advanced? And if fragments of earlier integration still lie beneath sand and sediment, what patience will be required to uncover them without distorting what they truly were? If time braids rather than climbs, if knowledge transforms rather than simply disappears, then what remains at the end of this long reflection is not a single hidden machine buried beneath desert sands, but a quiet shift in perspective. Throughout this journey, fragments have surfaced, drowned coastlines, resonant chambers, vanished manuscripts, astronomical alignments, climatic upheavals, institutional filters. None of them alone prove the existence of a lost supercivilization. None demand belief in secret empires erased from textbooks. And yet, taken together, they reveal something subtler and perhaps more unsettling: the fragility of certainty. Human history, as currently reconstructed, rests upon surviving evidence. But survival is selective. Stone outlives wood. Dry desert preserves papyrus. Humid jungle consumes it. Victors preserve their narratives. Marginalized voices fade. Sea levels rise and erase shorelines where early settlements once thrived. Oral traditions fracture under migration and disease. Libraries burn not always in dramatic flames, but in slow neglect. The question, then, may not be whether there was once a global civilization more advanced than ours in metal and electricity. The question may be whether humanity has experienced multiple phases of integrated understanding: ecological, astronomical, architectural, cognitive, that later fragmented under environmental stress or social transformation. Advanced does not have to mean industrial. It may mean attuned. A culture capable of reading celestial cycles with precision, managing water sustainably across generations, aligning architecture with acoustic and solar harmonics, transmitting memory through embodied practice. Such a culture could be sophisticated in ways modern metrics overlook. When climate shifts abruptly, when rivers change course, when drought lingers or seas advance, continuity fractures. Specialists disappear. Knowledge that required apprenticeship vanishes within a single generation. Survivors retain fragments, mythicized, ritualized, aestheticized. Over centuries, those fragments appear symbolic rather than technical. And then, millennia later, modern observers uncover the stone and ask how such precision emerged so suddenly. Perhaps it did not emerge suddenly. Perhaps it inherited quietly. There is humility in acknowledging that our present understanding is provisional. Archaeology continues to revise timelines. LiDAR reveals cities beneath forest canopies. Marine surveys map submerged river valleys. Genetic studies redraw migration pathways. Each discovery does not overturn history entirely, but it softens rigid edges, and yet caution remains essential. The allure of mystery can seduce the imagination into excess. To claim technologies beyond evidence risks distorting the very past one seeks to honour. The absence of proof for fantastical machinery does not diminish the depth of ancient achievement, it simply grounds it. What lingers instead is a more contemplative realization that knowledge is cyclical, that continuity depends on stability, and that stability is never guaranteed. Modern civilization rests upon global networks, digital archives, energy grids, supply chains. Information feels permanent because it is stored redundantly. Yet without power, without maintenance, digital memory evaporates. Our libraries are less stone than signal. If future generations were to uncover remnants of our era after millennia of erosion, what would remain? Concrete foundations, rusted alloys, perhaps satellite debris orbiting silently. Without intact databases, would they reconstruct our scientific frameworks accurately? Or would they interpret our artifacts through their own symbolic lenses? The thought is not apocalyptic, it is reflective. The Earth has endured ice ages and warm periods, impacts and extinctions. Within that vast timeline, human civilization occupies a slender margin. The idea that earlier societies may have risen to integrative heights and then contracted is not inherently radical. It is consistent with patterns visible even within recorded history. What remains unknown is scale. How complex were these earlier integrations? How widely did they extend? How completely were they erased? Answers may never be absolute. The ocean floor holds secrets beyond current reach. Sediment layers bury coastal plains. Tropical climates dissolve organic traces swiftly. And yet, perhaps the deeper invitation is not to chase hidden empires, but to reconsider what advancement truly means. If integration with environment once allowed societies to thrive sustainably, what might that teach the present? If astronomical awareness once guided calendars precisely, what humility might that inspire beneath the turning sky? If knowledge can thin and thicken across epochs, what responsibility accompanies its stewardship now? As this long meditation draws softly towards stillness, there is no final revelation, no dramatic unveiling. Only an image remains. Layers of sediment beneath the sea, constellations shifting slowly overhead, stones standing where memory falters. Between what survives and what is lost stretches quiet uncertainty, and perhaps that uncertainty is not something to resolve, but something to inhabit gently. If advanced technologies once held fragments of Earth's deeper history, they may not be hidden in vaults or guarded by secret councils. They may lie scattered in alignments, in myths, in forgotten agricultural terraces, in manuscripts half erased and rediscovered. The past is not silent, it is simply patient. And as night deepens and the mind drifts closer to rest, one final question remains suspended in the darkness, not demanding an answer, but inviting awareness. If history is less a straight ascent and more a series of tides, then as the waters of time rise and fall again, what will endure of us, and what quietly will be left to be wondered about by those who come after?